If you've ever stood in a museum admiring the warm brown shadows in an old oil painting, there's a real chance you were looking at ground-up corpses. Not a metaphor, not a figure of speech. For roughly 200 years, some of Europe's most famous painters used a paint color made by literally grinding up human remains, mummies pulled straight out of Egypt. It had a name, mummy brown, and it was one of the most popular pigments in Western art. Most people assume old paintings just used natural earth pigments, dirt, minerals, plants. Brown paint sounds like the least suspicious color there is. But the story of how this color ended up on canvas starts somewhere much stranger than an art studio. It starts with a medical mistake that lasted 600 years. Back in the 12th century, Europeans believed something completely false about how Egyptian mummies were made. They thought mummies were preserved using bitumen, a tar-like substance believed to have magical healing properties. So doctors did the obvious thing with a miracle medicine. They prescribed it. Ground-up mummy became a treatment for toothaches, dysentery, stomach aches, even chickenpox. For centuries, buying powdered mummy from an apothecary was a completely normal medical transaction. This wasn't a fringe belief. It was mainstream medicine, sold across Europe for hundreds of years. Then, sometime in the 18th century, someone noticed something else about this powder. When ground fine enough and mixed with white pitch and myrrh, it produced a rich, warm, transparent brown. Not muddy, not flat. A genuinely beautiful pigment, sitting perfectly between burnt umber and raw umber. Paint makers took notice, and just like that, a centuries-old medical fad quietly became an art supply. This wasn't some obscure back-alley pigment. Mummy brown became a favorite of major European painters, especially the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. It was prized specifically for its transparency, perfect for glazing, shading, and rendering realistic flesh tones, which is a detail that gets darker the longer you sit with it. Artists believed to have used it include Eugène Delacroix in his painting Liberty Leading the People, Martin Drolling, William Beechey, Edward Burne-Jones, Lawrence Alma Tadema. These aren't forgotten names. These are paintings still hanging in major museums today. Here's where it gets darker. A single mummy could produce enough paint to supply a merchant for 7 to 20 years. But as demand for the color grew, the actual supply of ancient Egyptian mummies started running out. So manufacturers improvised. Some substituted the bodies of enslaved people or executed criminals. After the French Revolution, the hearts of French kings, removed from the Abbey of Saint-Denis, were reportedly repurposed into paint as well. A color that started as a mistranslated medical treatment had become an actual industry with an actual supply chain, built on human remains, adjusting to demand like any other commodity. Eventually, the pigment started falling apart, literally. Mummy brown had poor permanence. It faded easily. Because it contained fat and ammonia, it was prone to cracking, and it could destabilize other colors on the same canvas. So even without anyone raising an ethical objection, the paint itself was quietly failing. But the ethical objection did come, and it came in a single, strange, almost tender moment. The painter Edward Burne-Jones didn't know what was in his paint. Almost none of the artists did. When he finally learned that his tube of mummy brown was compounded from actual human remains, he didn't just stop using it. He took his only tube out to his garden and buried it, gave it a small ceremonial burial, and marked the spot by planting a daisy root above it. One man quietly making peace with something he'd been unknowingly complicit in for years. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. This isn't some medieval practice that quietly ended centuries ago. In 1964, a London color maker called C. Roberson, the last remaining distributor of the pigment, stopped production. Not because of ethics, not because of outrage. They stopped because they had literally run out of mummies to grind up. Their last complete corpse had reportedly sold for £3 just a few years earlier. 1964, within living memory of people alive today. So the next time you're in a museum, standing in front of an 18th or 19th century oil painting, looking at those warm, rich brown shadows falling across a painted face, there's a real chance an ancient Egyptian is looking back at you from inside the paint itself. Today, paint sold under the name Mummy Brown is entirely synthetic, made from minerals like kaolin and hematite. No mummies required. But for 200 years, some of the most celebrated art in Western history wasn't just painted about human subjects. It was partially made of one,